Matt, we meet again. It's been a
We meet
while.
again, indeed. It's been a while. Yeah. How you doing?
How are you?
I'm doing well. Yeah. Staying busy. Staying out of trouble, I guess. Or
Yeah,
creating trouble. I'm not sure.
yeah, there's whenever we get together, there's usually a reason, and there's a really good.
Yeah, you've done something again.
Although my wife is getting suspicious because this is the third time that you've been on the pod, and it's like you're speaking to Matt Dixon again. Don't worry, nothing going on. So it's been quite an interesting journey because I think that initially the first time you and I spoke was a couple of years ago now. We spoke about Challenge Yourself,
That's
and
right.
it was long after the book was published actually. And then we got together to talk about JOLT EFFECT, which was
Yeah.
fascinating, and obviously has been a bit of a storm and a whirlwind since then. And now obviously you've got some new research that's coming out as
Hmm.
well, which I'm really excited to talk about because I've read it a couple of times now. I've read the article and.
Hmm.
It seems really interesting. It's obviously something that's quite close to my heart because it's the industry that I sell into, or
Sure.
I
Yeah.
sell as, I should say.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I tell you a really good place for us to start. I remember it was probably about June last year. It was before the JOLT EFFECT came out, and you were talking about it, and you sent me a couple of excerpts from it, and then you sent me a copy of it, and I ended up reading it, and I was super excited. Since it's come out, it's just gone bonkers. It appears like it's absolutely everywhere. It's become like common vernacular in selling now. And I go, this is all the time, and they're like, "Oh, you should read this book called The JOLT EFFECT," which I find really interesting. How's life been since The JOLT EFFECT came out?
It's been really interesting. I think this is an example probably of better to be lucky than good, I think. Not that misfortune is like something that we're excited about, but I do think, I mean, as you know, you're working with a lot of sales organizations, you're working with revenue leaders, and there's a lot of indecision going around. I mean, this is the kind of flavor du jour, right? And so it is feels like it's a moment in time. Now, I personally believe, and I know Ted does as well, and I know you guys have spoken about this, and I think Brent, I don't want to speak for Brent, but I think he would agree with this as well, that this rise in no decision losses is a secular trend. So in many respects, I think the current environment's a bit of a red herring. Like we're seeing a spike right now, but I don't think it's going to recede out of the current kind of field of view. I think it's a problem that's here to stay because if you remember in the book, we talk about the things that cause indecision are too many choices, too much information, and really, I would not put too fine a point on it, but value propositions that are transformative, ergo expensive, risky, and disruptive. And if you think about like what's going on in all the spaces that you and I play in, and the leaders we talk to, all of those companies are on a journey to offer more options to customers. Partner ecosystems. They're adding capabilities, roadmap items, you name it. There's tons more information. Brent talks about this extensively, and I couldn't agree with him more. And then we are on a journey. Most companies are on a journey to get out of selling transactional kind of product focused sales and more to disruptive transformational solutions. Like I defy you to find a single supplier out there that doesn't promise transformation to its customers. So I think those are the things that are pushing indecision and creating indecision, and that ultimately leading to no decision losses. So I think these are problems that are here to stay. We are seeing a kind of moment in time right now where it is the hot button issue. We didn't plan for that; it just kind of happened that way. So it's been really interesting. I mean, the past year has been a total whirlwind. I think you and I spoke. I want to say it was either right when the book came out. I know we talked about the research long before it came out. I think you were one of the folks who saw the advanced preview. So all those people who tell Aaron like you should read this book called JOLT EFFECT. He read it when it was like not even bound. I think it was like a PDF I sent him. So we've been talking about this for a long time. And the past year has been a whirlwind of like just a lot of speaking on it, podcasts, workshops, training around Jolt, in trying to move the needle more in the salesperson's favor, so they can contend with this new enemy that they're encountering.
Do you think that you've helped?
I think so. The feedback certainly from teams that we've engaged in has been very positive. I will tell you the biggest thing that so there's this thing I've actually added into my keynotes. This is unfortunate for podcasts because people can't actually see the thing, but maybe we could throw a link up here, or you can superimpose it using your fantastic AV skills that I lack. But some of the listeners, and Aaron, you may have seen this. You know that like meme that went around the internet like 2 years ago? My kids showed me this, which it's a picture of a bunch of paper plates and bowls, and it says on the top, all of these plates and bowls are upside down, except one. See if you can find the one that's right side up. And
Yeah.
then when you find it, and then it says, now look at the plates again, and they all look right side up. And so I always show that at the end of my presentations because, as you know, JOLT, it's an acronym. There are 4 behaviors. There's a lot of stuff within each of them. And I find salespeople are like, there's a lot here. Like, what is the thing I should go do tomorrow? And I always tell them, like, in many ways, you don't have to do anything because now you know. Look, if you exist in a world where you've only ever been told by your manager, your sales leader, your colleagues that this hesitant customer, it just doesn't see the value, right? They don't get the cost, they don't understand the cost of inaction.
Mm.
In that world, every hesitant customer looks like a nail, and all you've got is your one FOMO hammer to use. But
Yeah.
now you exist in a world where you know that if this customer is hesitating, it may be because you haven't convinced them of the value and they
Mm.
believe the status quo is good enough. But more often than not, it's not because of that. It's not the fear of missing out. It's the fear of messing up, the FOMO. And now just understanding that for salespeople, that means you hit the pause button, right? Before you dangle that 10% discount or you try to use FUD techniques or try to reconvince them of the value proposition. That those things we now know can actually make things worse for you, not better, because you're just using scare tactics to sell to somebody who's already afraid. And so I think it's just that realization that is the most helpful, actually, and being able to now understand that buyer decision making is a lot more complicated. There's a lot more to it. And you owe it to yourself and your customer actually to dig deeper. And so now we've taught them the techniques to do that, to identify what's really going on, and then given what you find, to do something about it. And then, if you will, stop pushing your customer and start kind of putting an arm around them and saying it's going to be okay. As Brent talks a lot about this, let me instill the confidence and get you to a point where you feel great about the decision, that you're not scared of what could go wrong.
I think in my experience, in my opinion, the best sales literature is kind of codifying what we already know and putting a
Mm-hmm.
name to it. And
Yeah.
what I found really interesting about JOLT Effect, and the reason I think it resonated so well with senior leaders within businesses, is because they recognize these traits in their own
Yes.
organization.
Yeah.
Whereas with other literature, like even with challengers to a degree, it was kind of like that's just a sales thing, let them get on with it.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas I think JOLT Effect really resonated with senior players in business because of that. Is that like, actually we're a victim of this in our own organization. So
Yeah.
yes, this is probably happening in other businesses as well, I think.
I think you're right. I've heard that a lot, and it's and the other thing is that I think senior sales leaders, they've experienced this as well. What's so interesting I think about this story is it's not even a story of like B2B commerce, and in many ways it's a story of human decision making. When we teach our course, and we have a lot of like, think about a time where you felt like the salesperson was kind of pushing you into making a decision before you were fully invested in that decision, and you didn't really have the confidence. And it's like you've got to work hard to get the group to stop talking about these because everyone has, and many times these are personal examples. Like
Mm.
I was looking at a flat, and the realtor, what the agent was, pressing me into signing, and I was still busy shopping. I didn't know if I wanted that flat. I didn't know if that was in my budget. I didn't know if it was the neighborhood I wanted to live in. I didn't know if my significant other would like the flat as much as I did. And I'm still shopping and considering, but now they're threatening me with this. Well, there's a lot of other people looking at it, and you know how flats in London go, and it's gonna disappear if you don't act now. And it's like, how many times have we been in that situation ourselves? And it's just something people can really relate to. And so it's a very personal and very human story, I think. But I think you're right. I think it does resonate at that high level, and it's something that I think senior sales leaders see in their best sellers. They've already figured this out. But in many respects, I think their average sellers lack the confidence to do the things that senior sellers do to instill confidence. So, for example, telling the customer what not to buy, or pointing out places where your competitor is actually better than you are at something. And maybe the customer should consider going with your competitor because you just want to help them get to a great decision. Or telling them, you know what, I know you want to buy the $1 million solution, but I actually think it might be in your best interest to start a bit smaller. It's less pressure on you. We get some experience working together, learn some lessons, good and bad, and then let's expand from there. Those are gutsy things for a salesperson to do. And I think senior sales leaders see that their best sellers have the confidence to do those things, and it conveys in terms of more buyer confidence and ultimately better, higher quality deals, better conversion rate, etc.
Yeah, I agree with you. Particularly on this confidence piece as well, is that when you go through the JOT effect, very very little of it is actually competence. Like it's not
Mm,
like you're sitting there going, "Here's a load of like skills that you can practice and do today." Of course, there's an
yeah,
element of that, but actually there's two things. It's getting sellers to be confident in doing that, and actually getting experienced sellers that aren't doing well
Yeah.
be confident in doing something different. And I
Yeah.
think that actually is probably more compelling because I think that
Yeah.
makes up the market. So obviously, it's been quite an interesting journey, like watching this over probably over the last 15 years of you
Mhm.
up to the most modern research that you've done is where you were with obviously CB Gartner
Mhm.
eventually, um, and obviously that was around business intelligence and research, and then moving into the work you did with Tether, which was the from what I understand the genesis of the Jolt effect.
Exactly. Yeah.
And now with DCM Insights, it's now been quite an interesting piece of research where you've gone really like industry focused, right?
Yeah.
And it seems obviously professional services is the broader umbrella, but this seems super focused in on law firms, if I'm not mistaken. Is that correct?
Well, actually, all professional services firms. So the data is based on what I call doer sellers. So think about people who sell their own advisory skills. So folks like yourself, right? But it's management consultants, could be sales consultants, investment bankers, lawyers, accountants, executive search partners, PR and corporate reputation advisors, advertising advisors, right? So this is ultimately where the product you are selling is yourself, right? And you're selling your own skills as an advisor, as a consultant to help your client achieve a certain business outcome. Now, what's interesting about the model is, as you know very well, and you live this every single day, is this is a doer seller model. So it's one of the only spaces where and historically in sales, you know this very well, and I've written about B2B sales, right? So that is a world in which you've got a team that makes a product, you've got a team that sells the product, you got a team that markets the product, you got a team that uh, yeah, executes on implementing the product and making sure customers get value out of it, and then you got a team that helps customers when they have problems and they need support. And those are all different functions and departments in your typical professional services firm, all of those jobs rest on the partner, right? So your job is to market your own skills. And your firm might help you, but your job is to get the word out about what you're good at and what you can do for clients. Your job is to sell that business. Your job is to execute on the work that's been sold. Maybe you have the support of some associates on your team, right? It's a more of a leverage model, but it ultimately comes down to you. You are the product that's being sold. And then it is your job to make sure that the client is in a position where they want to hire you again, right? That you can renew and expand and grow that relationship. So one of the things I tell professional services leaders and partners all the time is, look, I've spent a lot of my career studying what great salespeople do, and I can tell you, and you know this, Aaron, very well. It's hard to be a good salesperson, and it's hard to be world class at sales, even if it's your full time job, right?
Mm.
So salespeople, that's all they do is sell. Now they might feel like they answer a lot of internal emails and they have a lot more on their plate, and that is true. But their job is sales, right? That is what they do. It's not their job to build the product. It's not their job to implement the product. It's not their job to solve problems with the product. Their job is to sell the product. And if you do that every waking moment of your life, you might be world class at it. You have a chance of doing it. But think about a world in which that's only a part time job, yet you've still got to execute at a very high level. That's a really daunting task for a doer seller, a partner in an accounting firm or an investment banker or a search consultant. And so I came to appreciate a long time ago that this was a very different kind of sale than what we'd written about historically. In fact, I'll tell you, if you'll indulge me, I'll tell you a quick story from our mutual friend, Neil Rackham. Professor Rackham told me the story years ago. It was actually funny. It was the day I met him, and we had traveled down to his house in Leesburg to share some of the Challenger research. Brent was with me, as was our research team from CEB, and we walked him through the Challenger research. And we had a great discussion. That's where he offered to write the forward to the book. We graciously accepted. You know, who wouldn't? And it was phenomenal. Went out for lunch, and he told me this amazing story, which at the time I thought was really funny that it happened to him until it happened to me about a year later. So he told me a story about presenting at a partner retreat. He used to work with some of the big strategy and management consulting firms, and when he was first getting Huthwaite off the ground and bringing spin selling to the market, and he told me a story about how he was presenting at a global partner retreat, and the managing partner, he was delivering his research around spin selling, and the managing partner kind of stopped him 2/3 of the way through the presentation and said, you know, Professor Rackham, please stop. And all these partners are like, what's going on here? Like the managing partner just interrupted Professor Rackham in the middle of his speech, and Professor Rackham, because he's a gracious guy, says, please, how can I help? I was going to answer questions at the end, but I'll take them now. Managing partner says, Professor, you keep talking about salespeople and selling and sales this and sales that, but what you've got to understand is that we don't actually sell anything. In fact, we don't do sales at our firm. And what Professor Rackham said at the moment was, he just kind of, in the way he does, he puts his hands behind his back and he kind of like stares at the floor for a moment, and then he says, let's stipulate, shall we, that there's a mysterious process by which the client's money ends up in your bank account, and let's call it sales. And so all the partners start laughing. I thought this was the greatest story I'd ever heard. But the best thing about it was that it happened to him, not me, because I don't know what I would do in that moment. Fast forward about a year, I'm out there presenting Challenger, actually presenting Challenger at a consulting firm, and the same exact thing happened to me. I kind of got called out as like, this, I don't think this is relevant. We don't do sales here. And I said the same thing that Professor Rackham did. I don't know if I got the laugh that he got when I said it, but it was that moment kind of scarred me for life. And so that was a long time ago. It was like 2012, 2013. I left Gartner shortly after the acquisition, 2017. I actually went into management consulting. I was working at Korn Ferry and running their global sales effectiveness consulting group. My client at the time, who's now one of my founding partners at DCMI, was a guy named Rory Channer. He and I were old friends from the CEB days. Rory had actually landed at a law firm, so career B2B sales and marketing guy, 30 years of experience in private equity-backed companies, venture-backed companies, publicly traded companies, you name it, always in sales and marketing leadership roles. He got approached by one of the biggest law firms in the world whose growth had kind of stalled out a bit. They'd sort of started to fall out of the AmLaw 50, which is, one of the big rankings that people care about in law. And so they were flat to down. They decided, they had a new chairman who came in. They decided they were going to make a big change. They were going to bring somebody in to run business development, marketing and business development, but who was not from the law world, right? We want to bring in a B2B sales and marketing leader to basically breathe some new life into this firm that had gotten a bit stale. And so he came in, he spent the next 4 years, a variety of things, technology investments, restructuring how they do marketing and how their BD team supports the partners and all kinds of things. But the biggest thing he did actually was that he, at the time, so we were longtime friends, he actually hired my team to come in, and we ran this project where we studied 100 of their top partners, just looking at time spent characteristics, psychographics, like we did a detailed survey about behaviors. And we produced something that was pretty eye-opening, which, one, provided a roadmap to this law firm about here's what your best people are actually doing. It's not what you think they're doing, it's what they're actually doing, how they spend their time, how they use tools and resources, how they engage clients, how they pitch for business, how they grow relationships, how they negotiate. It's a very broad-based study. But the big thing for me was that now Rory took this content, he turned it into a global training program, began the front end for a global training program, and he helped that firm more than double its growth in 4 years. It became the fastest growing law firm in the world, and he trained thousands of people on this, what we learned in that research. But for me as a researcher, what was most eye-opening was what we found was very different from what we had found in B2B sales, in the Challenger research. And so I always had in the back of my head those scary interactions presenting Challenger at consulting organizations and professional services firms. This experience when I was at Korn Ferry and Rory was at his law firm. And then fast forward to 2020, we were both kind of looking for our next thing. And Rory said, I think, and he had told me this years ago, he's like, I think there's something here. We should go do that study, but on a much broader basis. That was one of the sort of the impetus for forming DCM Insights. We found a sponsor of that study, a software company called Intap. They're a cloud provider to professional services and financial services firms, so they know this industry very, very deeply. And they had the same question. They believed in, as a product company in the space, we want to understand what is it that the best partners do differently. And we don't believe any of the existing literature, and certainly not any of the B2B sales research, is directly relevant to this unique space. They said, would you guys consider, basically, can we contract with you to go out and do the study, which became the Rainmaker Genome Project, or the Activator Research, which we just published in HBR a couple weeks ago.
Yeah, it's fascinating stuff. And I was reading about a couple of things. First of all, the sort of level of detail in the research itself. And obviously these 5 profiles as well, which is really interesting. I'm going to touch on those in a moment. I think there has to be an acknowledgement that it is a very different type of selling to selling a product. Or
it is.
It's very different. And having read now the research and again, what I think is really good about it is the way that you've kind of codified what is quite common thinking about these things, but actually you can sit there and go, that's what it is. It really helps understand it far better. And I keep saying that, and obviously there's more to it than that. I'm not sitting here going, all you've done is put a fancy name on it. Actually, quite the opposite of that, because I was even things like the 108 attributes. I mean, codifying competency and skill, I know is a absolute nightmare. To go and do that for what is a service sell must be really, really difficult. But talk us through these 5 profiles, because this feels like this is the kind of central thesis, is that there's 5 profiles of seller, but there's one that is outperforming by some distance in a market that is basically predicting decline, right? When you look at professional services as a rule, there's, I think, 37% decline by 2027, was it? I think I saw.
If I take a step back, professional services firms are like any other commercial organization. They struggle with the 80-20 problem, which is, our top 20% of performers drive 80% of the growth. Now, in professional services, it tends to be even more skewed. It's in most firms more like 85-15 or 90-10. So they would be happy if it was 80-20. It's typically even more skewed. And I think part of the problem is historically, like that story that Professor Rackham told me, these firms have kind of frowned upon sales, even as a term, right? They think it's a pejorative. They don't talk about it. They don't equip their partners to do it. And so what ends up happening is that there are a handful of people who figure it out, and then everyone else struggles. Now, that's always been true, so that's an evergreen problem. But what firms are seeing is that gap is starting to widen, and it's being driven by a particular phenomenon on the customer side. If they look at their clients, what's really interesting is for a very, very long time, legal services, accounting services, consulting services, investment banking, M&A advisory, these professional services were inside of big companies treated like a black box. So when it comes to like hard concrete products, we run it through the procurement ringer. But when it comes to the CEO picking up the phone and calling like his or her buddy who they went to law school with or who they play golf with on the weekends to do a high-end overpriced consulting engagement or to provide support on a legal matter, procurement kind of looks the other way, or at least they have historically. So this has been kind of this black box of spend. It has not been formalized. Procurement wasn't involved. And what that meant for professional services partners is, as long as you had a great relationship with your client and you did great work, odds are if the client has a new need, they're just going to come right back to you. There's no formal pursuit. There's no competition. There's no RFP in this space. But that's really started to change. And it's actually started to change over the past 5 years. So the data point you're referring to, we asked buyers, about 100 C-level executives, agree or disagree with the following statement. If the partner or firm you worked with in the past did good work, would you go back to them if a new need arose? And about 5 years ago, respondents said, yeah, it's about 75% of people, 73% I think it was, said, yeah, I'd just go back to the same partners and firms, no problem. Today, it's about half. And looking out 5 years from now, most buyers say that only about a third of them agree with that statement. I think it was 37% specifically said, I would just go back to the same firms and partners. And when you talk to clients, to buyers about this, they talk about a dramatically different world of procurement. So there's a couple things going on. One is procurement has gotten into this black box, right? They're starting to formalize it. When it comes to outside counsel spend, hiring management and strategy consultants, looking at which executive search firm we should use to fill our CFO position or CMO position. These are now much more formalized, competitive processes, bids, if you will, or bake-offs. The other thing that's happening, I think, is that a lot of senior executives are reporting back that, it might have been okay in the past to put your thumb on the scale for your buddy at a law firm or an accounting firm or an investment bank, but that's kind of frowned upon today. In fact, a lot of senior executives we interviewed said, I got away with that stuff 5 years ago, but if I have a personal relationship with the partner or firm in question, I actually recuse myself today because I can't be seen as putting my thumb on the scale and influencing the decision, right? So that could land us in very hot water with our shareholders, with our employees, and we don't want to end up on the front page of the newspaper because I put my thumb on the scale for a partner that ended up delivering bad work for us.
Interesting, really interesting.
So this is
almost like a fear of cronyism or a fear of sort of like
fear of cronyism. I think that's really well put. So we collected data, and as you asked about before, it was 1,800 partners from across the major subsegments of professional services: law, accounting, consulting, search, investment banking, PR, and corporate reputation management. There are lots of other disciplines: engineering, architecture, design, advertising,
Mm.
marketing consulting. We didn't cover that. We didn't look at sales consulting, for instance, but we cast a pretty broad net. And it was 1,800 partners we collected data on. As you said, it was 108 attributes we studied. The survey itself was about 35 or 40 minutes in length. A lot of forced trade-off questions where a partner would look at a question and we would ask them, between this extreme and this extreme, both of which sound like right answer, place yourself on this continuum when it comes to pitching for business or negotiating fees or dealing with upset clients, et cetera. And so it was a pretty rigorous. We didn't get any hate mail from partners, but we did get a lot of. That was a lot harder than I thought it was going to be. It took a lot more time than I thought. We then asked every firm that sponsored the study within their firm, we asked them to rate their partners on their business development performance and effectiveness. And we use a standard scale of questions, things like how good is this partner relative to his or her peers on overall BD effectiveness, landing new clients, expanding existing clients, cross-selling the firm's services, all the stuff. We created a composite score for each partner as rated by their firm leadership. And then we did a whole set of analysis. Now, the one you mentioned, the 5 profiles, it was actually the same methodology we used when we did the Challenger research. So we took this big data set and we did something called factor analysis. And what that does is first of all, it scrapes out all the insignificant variables, but the ones that are significant, it looks for the way that those variables move together as categories within a large data set. So again, it's not us putting the variables in buckets, it's the model putting variables in buckets. And we came to call those, as you know, in Challenger, the 5 profiles of salespeople. We found something very similar in professional services, 5 unique profiles of partners. So we came to call these the 5 types of business developers, the 5 types of partners. So I'll walk through them really quickly, but these are what's interesting about these is I think when we hit on some of these, you'll say, oh, that one sounds like a Challenger, that one sounds like this kind of person. And there is some overlap for sure, but these were unique profiles because the data set was specific to professional services. So the first one is the expert. The expert is the partner who will tell you, Aaron, I didn't go to law school to be a salesperson, right? But when you make partner in a firm, you're expected to not just deliver the work, but sell the work. What it means in practical terms is that the expert ends up, they want to market their own expertise. They do it through thought leadership. They do it through speaking at conferences, etc. They want to send a signal to the market that they are an expert in this specific area. It might be employment law, or it might be IP litigation. It might be a certain type of M&A work, or a certain type of executive search work, or digital transformation, or sales, digital selling, whatever it is. But I'm going to send a message to the market that if you are in the market for this kind of expertise, I'm your person. In really practical terms, what that means, though, is that by the time, so these people end up being very reactive when it comes to selling. They wait for the phone to ring, wait for that email to come in. But by the time the client is reaching out to them, they're almost always talking to a few other partners and firms that also profess to be experts, because nobody owns a space unto themselves, right? They're always competitors. So the second profile is we call it the confidant. Now, the confidant, I think, is probably most akin to that old school notion of the trusted advisor in professional services, which is I have a small handful, usually like 3 to 5, really deep, long-standing relationships with a handful of clients. Many times those clients, I have personal relationships with them that actually predate our business relationship. So I went to law school with this person, or we worked in a company together. Now, this person is a client, they're a CFO, I'm an investment banker, and they have become my client, not just my friend. So that's an interesting thread that you hear come out of these interviews when you talk to the confidants. But what the confidant believes is, if I go really deep with these clients, meaning I bend over backwards for them, I deliver exceptional service, and I deliver great work product that achieves the business outcomes that my clients expect, and I forge deep business and personal relationships, I have effectively built a moat around this client that makes it impossible for anybody else to come and steal the business. They should just call me the next time they have a need. Now, what's also interesting is because they've invested so deeply in those relationships, they're very unlikely to share those relationships inside their own firms. So they don't put any notes in the CRM system. They don't walk their colleagues into, they're not cross-selling. They're not making referrals. They kind of hoard the relationship because they don't want anybody to screw it up for them.
Yeah.
The third profile is the activator. The activator is kind of a super connector. So very, very active on LinkedIn. They use tools like Sales Navigator. They'll pay for it themselves, even if their firm doesn't provide it as a resource. They're very active at events as well. So they might go to a firm sponsored event or an industry conference. These are the people who look at the attendee list. They're setting up breakfasts and lunches and dinners and coffees and drinks with people that they want to connect with. They go with a goal in mind of this is how many new connections I'm going to come out of this event with. And then they try to turn those connections into conversations and ultimately into paying client relationships. And the way they do that is they activate that network. So they purposely build a network and then they activate it. And the way they do it is by bringing, there's a little bit challenger in here, by bringing new ideas to clients before clients actually realize these ideas themselves. So for instance, it might be, Aaron, I don't know if you saw, but there's been a regulatory change in a market that your firm competes in. And this might represent a threat or an opportunity for you guys, but I'd be happy to give you my point of view. Let's hop on a Zoom and talk about it. Let's go grab a coffee and discuss. Now, when I do that, I'm not looking for you to pay me for the work. I'm looking to pay it forward. So I want to demonstrate my expertise and my advisory skills, especially if we've never done business together. But
Yeah.
also, when you realize this is a need and you are going to carve out budget for it and you are going to look for a service provider, I've got a leg up because I'm the one who brought you the idea and I gave you some free advice. Everyone else is only going to give you advice if you pay them. I did it on a non-billable basis. And the last thing about the activator is they are super connectors externally, but also internally. So they look to shift the locus of loyalty from a client who's only loyal to me to a client who becomes loyal to the collective we of the firm, meaning I'm trying to bring in others because I know when I do that, and we are supporting you across multiple domain areas or functional areas, that's a high tensile strength relationship that the client thinks twice before they break, right? If we're supporting you in many areas. If you're just working with me, easy come, easy go, right? Now, in the fourth profile, we call the debater. Now, this one I think is, most people will hear me say this will say that sounds like a challenger. I might describe these folks maybe not as challengers, but certainly challenging. And so what I mean by that is that they're kind of sharp-elbowed, opinionated know-it-alls. They come in like a bull in the china shop. Their goal is to just reframe the way the client's thinking about this opportunity or what they're looking for and just turn it upside down, but in a way that leads to their unique point of view. So I'll give you a quick example. We interviewed an executive search consultant who, search is a pretty commodity. It's the pricing for an executive search or an executive placement is the same across all firms. The network of candidates is the same across all firms. It's LinkedIn, right? Whoever can get that candidate. So really, there's not a lot to differentiate on. And so what many of these partners will do, and this one partner we interviewed said, my goal is if I know I'm competing against all the other big search firms, I come in and my goal is to tell the client they've got the job spec all wrong. And they're looking in completely, because I know everyone else is telling them what they want to hear. I'm going to tell them something totally different. Now, the client may not always go for that, but what it does is it creates white space and differentiation for me in the pursuit. Now, tipping my mid a little bit to the results, these folks, that turns out, it may be a great way to sell software or medical devices, this kind of debater or challenger approach. It's not a great way to sell professional services. This was one of the big surprises to me personally. And I think the reason is that if the product you're selling is you, then having that posture with clients can actually be pretty exhausting. In fact, clients told us, I want the partners I work with to push my thinking. I want them to push me outside my comfort zone. Don't just be a bartender, be a personal trainer. But if every time I sit down with you, you're telling me I'm doing it wrong, I don't have time for that. Sometimes I just need you to do the things I need you to do. The last profile is the realist. So the realist is an interesting profile, another one you don't find in B2B sales at all. And I think for a very specific reason. So the realist is the truthful, transparent broker of honesty with the client, meaning they tell it like it is the client. They tell them what they want to hear, but what they need to hear. They don't sign up for work they can't deliver on. They are very comfortable saying no. They're very clear with clients about budgetary expectations and what business outcomes they should expect from an engagement. Clients love the honesty. It's the lack of aspirational quality to the realist that they find a bit of a downer. But I will tell you, it's funny because I think the reason you find these folks in professional services, but you don't find them in B2B sales is very specific, which is when you're buying software or you're buying a product, you can touch it, you can feel it, you can evaluate it. When you're buying somebody's expertise, that's a much harder thing to evaluate. So partners sell off their track record. They sell off their reference client list. but really you're kind of buying an idea, right? You're buying somebody what's between somebody's 2 years. It's quite hard to kick the tires on that. And so these realists know every client out there has been burned before by a consultant, a lawyer, or accountant who's overpromised and underdelivered,
Yeah.
who sent a surprise invoice after the matter is concluded that is well in excess of what I said our budget was. And people have a bad taste in their mouths about that. So these folks do the exact opposite. So those are our 5 profiles. I will say, just like Challenger, every partner was a combination of all 5. So
Yeah, of course, it's like a
people
scale.
are complicated. Yeah, partners
Yeah.
are especially complicated people, but every single one of them spiked in one of those 5 as their primary posture.
I tell you what I found really interesting about the research, and something jumped out to me straight away, right? And I sort of had a wry smile on your face as you were naming those industries, right? When you think about those industries, what they will have in common, where you've got like law firms, you've got in there management consultants, you've
Mm-hmm.
got in there executive search firms. The first thing that jumps to mind is that those industries have a serious depletion in trust across their customer base,
Don't they? Yeah, they really
and
do.
and almost borderline like a bad reputation, right?
Yeah.
Which you kind of understand because they're selling a service. I think again, you're right. If you're selling a car, same way we feel about mechanics, right? It's like the service is them fixing something. That's the
Yeah.
service that they're buying, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't surprise me that these kind of activators or these like value detectives are the ones that are actually winning the race in the customer's eyes, because what you're talking about there is touching into like a couple of human instincts, like reciprocity,
Mm-hmm.
like connecting people to additional value that they're paying for, even they've begun to even think about paying for at the moment. This doesn't surprise me that this only opens people's trusts, but eventually
Yeah.
opens their wallets as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it was really interesting for me because as I read all of those 5, the activator, the thing that it clearly had above the others was that, and I use the term value detective. I really keep thinking about it like this: is that it's not about ego, but the other
Mm-hmm.
4, they're sort of like really ego driven, right? This is about what can I get from it, whereas the activator is like, well, how can I just make things happen, which I really
Yeah.
really liked.
Yeah.
It must have been interesting as that progressed.
Absolutely. And you've hit on a number of themes there. I think you're right. The typical partner, certainly the other 4. You look at the confidant. These are my clients, or the expert. It's all about me selling my expertise, or the debater. It's all about me changing your mind and convincing you that I know better than you do. Are very egocentric kind of approaches. And the activator is very different. The activator, some of them have described themselves. This happened actually in 2 interviews. Described themselves not because we asked about their expertise, and they said, I have areas that I focus on, but I consider myself a really good general contractor for expertise, meaning I'm really good at connecting people in my network, connecting my clients with others in my firm. And when I can help personally, absolutely. But I go through this journey of delivering value to clients with no ego around this should all be mine,
Yeah,
but rather what can I do to help that client achieve the outcomes that they really care about. There's another thing about value and how value kind of flows through the relationship. This came out in the data, but it also came out even more colorfully in the interviews. Um, we find that so partners in general think about value in 3 dimensions. I think the first is obviously business value. Am I helping my client achieve the business outcomes they want, whether it's digital transformation if I'm a consultant, or it's a successful hire if I'm an executive search professional, or if it's a case that we win or avoid perhaps if I'm a lawyer. But they also think about, secondly, trust value. So can I be relied upon to deliver what I say I'm going to do on the timetable I say, at the cost I say it's going to run for the client. So business value and trust value. The third dimension we call personal value, and it's one of those things. I think it dovetails a little bit with your egocentricity point, which is these folks are looking to give back to their clients and do so even in personal ways. So they talk about moments where some of the most powerful moments in their client relationship, which had nothing to do with doing work for them, but it had to do with perhaps offering some perspective or advice to your client that helped them personally achieve something maybe in their career. We talked to a search consultant who said, you know, one of the things I always do when I see somebody in one of my clients, somebody in my network who's moving to another geography, and of course senior executives are spanning the world in terms of being redeployed to run different markets in different regions. I will always reach out and say, I would love to put you in touch with my colleagues in Singapore, my colleagues in London, because for a couple of reasons. One, I think it would be really, they have a great perspective on the talent market there. And I think it'd be somebody in the market who can lend a useful perspective. But even if all they do is provide you with some advice about where the good restaurants are and maybe what show to go see on the weekend and maybe what schools that you might consider for your children, that would be and so they're thinking, they're looking out for their clients on a personal level too. So
Mm.
they look for that extra level of personal value. Absolutely, they deliver great business outcomes. Absolutely, they deliver that trust value. It's that personal value that I think is a differentiator. And again, it came through in the data, but it really came through in the interviews how they think about clients in that way, which is very much the opposite of being egocentric, I think.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. And again, as a buyer, it doesn't surprise you, right? Like when someone's going to that level and displaying that level of detail as well to actually help you.
Yeah,
Again, it doesn't surprise you that it wins hearts and wallets, right? So
yeah,
talk to me about this then, because this is I think like maybe the fourth or fifth significant piece of research that you've done, including obviously the Challenger stuff, the Challenger customer, and the effortless experience. Um, What's it like when the research comes together? When you start seeing those trends, it must be really exciting when you get there and you're like, this is starting to show this. Because I'm guessing you go out to prove a hypothesis or prove a hypothesis wrong, and you either prove it or disprove it through the
yeah.
research. It must be super exciting when that happens.
Yeah, it is. Although I would say it's a little bit like if you asked somebody like in R&D and pharmaceuticals or life sciences or something, say, boy, it must be amazing when we discovered this thing that drives better health outcomes for people. But they don't tell you about all the ones that didn't pan out. And so
Yeah.
that's the so those never appear in HBR. There are no books written about those. But and you ask Brant or Nick Toman or any of the folks who we had the pleasure of working with on the Challenger research, and my current partner Karen Freeman is one of our DCMI partners, was the research leader on that, and she and I talk about this often, which is for every one of those studies that just kind of came together and you were able to hit a moment in the market where things had changed,
Mm,
and tell a story that was different from the conventional wisdom, and gave people a new perspective, and that you had the data behind it, but also you could tell it in a compelling storytelling kind of way. For every one of those, there are like 10 other studies that were completely uninteresting, like just confirmed what everybody already suspected. And like, because like not everything people think and do is wrong. There's a lot of stuff they do that's actually quite right. And so I think, and that's rewarding too, but maybe differently rewarding. It's you're confirming something. Maybe you thought there was something there, but there isn't. But that in and of itself, I think, is valuable as well. So, we spent decades at CEB. We would do multiple of these studies every year, and only a handful of them ended up, showing up in HBR and being the subject of books, and
mm.
then, turning into things like Challenge or like Jolt or like this new Activator research. So, yeah, so it is rewarding, it is exciting, but there's a lot of there's a lot of cutting room floor material that was a lot less exciting and less interesting. So,
Yeah, I suppose what's left on the cutting room floor, right?
yeah,
I'm sure there's stuff that didn't make it. So,
mountains of stuff. Yeah.
yeah, well, it's the old Thomas Edison. I can tell you 10,000 ways how not to make a light bulb, right?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
um, Interesting. So back to the research then. So I mean, obviously, I read the HBR article, and it spoke about just how compelling this activator profile is, and actually how much more weight they carry and
Yeah.
also success they carry versus the other four profiles.
Hmm.
So here's the question:
Hmm.
how do you spot them? How do you create them? How do you make them in your business?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So, a couple of things. One is how to spot them. This was really interesting to us, Aaron, is that after we figured out, so we were doing these interviews, and then we got the quantitative research, and we kind of identified these 5 profiles, and the interviews completely changed. And what I mean by that is we could tell within like 30 seconds which profile somebody fell into. Just like it is very pattern consistent in that way. Now, obviously, that's hard to scale. So we've actually built a diagnostic, which is 40-minute survey, a little bit of a tough sell in professional services where time literally is money. Um, and so we created a kind of a skinny down version. It's more of a 10 to 15-minute diagnostic version, and a partner can get their activator score, individual activator score, and then it will show their skyline. Here's the stuff where you're kind of on par with world-class activators. Here's the stuff you're kind of there's some daylight and you might want to focus here. So I think that is a very practical tool for partners, associates, even people who are looking to up their game and develop a little bit more of this activator muscle. The development piece, two things. One, our firm, DCMI, we do a lot of training at the associate level, the senior associate level, the income partner level, the full partner level, teaching people how to do what activators do. But I will also say, remember in Challenger, we used to talk about how Challenger was both an individual salesperson skill, but also an organizational capability.
Yeah.
That's also true of Activator. What was interesting is across the firms that participated, there were a couple that had spikes in activators, like disproportionate spikes that looked very different from the other firms in the study. Not like small spikes, but they were like, huge percentage of their partners fell into that activator profile. They didn't have the term at the time, but they'd already figured out that was a better go-to-market approach for their partners. And when you talk to the leaders of those firms, what's so interesting is they say that, look, this is getting people to engage clients in this way and to basically sell in this way, in this activator way, requires a couple of things. One, the firm has got to invest in development. And what's so interesting is, a lot of professional services don't train their partners how to sell. They don't talk about it. It's a four-letter word. They don't do much business development training. And if they do, oftentimes this is training they brought in from B2B sales, the B2B sales world. And so you bring in B2B sales trainers and it kind of goes in one ear and out the other because these partners immediately think, well, we're not selling software, I'm selling myself. My experience of trying to teach, consultants how to do Challenger is different because, we talk about in Challenger, you got to lead to the product, but what if you are the product, right? It's a different kind of thing. And so a lot of the B2B sales training kind of falls flat with these folks and they've kind of been burned in the past. The second thing is that a lot of firms don't invest in any kind of BD training until people make partner. And then it becomes about behavior change or correction more than development. So the best firms tell us that they start investing in this at, probably year 2, year 3 of an associate's career. So when they come in, they start training them on these things. How do I build and manage a network as a strategic asset? How do I develop a cadence and routine around business development, which is part and parcel of the activator approach, a daily kind of metronomic cadence to my business. I don't do business development when I have time to do it. I do it every day and I protect that time.
That's
And how do
like,
I,
it seems like such low hanging fruit though.
I know, yeah, no, I get it.
Why
But again, it's,
make it?
this is not B2B sales. So this is like, is a different world out there in professional services. And you would think like, yeah, this seems pretty straightforward, but you would be surprised how few firms actually do this. I would say the second thing is the leaders of these firms, these heavy activator firms, would tell us you've got to have an operating system, meaning tools and technology, a marketing team, a BD support team, a marketing collateral. Um, you've got to have a system, an infrastructure that rewards people for doing the activator. Not rewards them, but supports them to do the activator thing. And the last piece, I sort of stepped on this a moment ago, but is you've got to have incentives and rewards that encourage people to do things that activators do. So that could be how do we recognize people not for just hitting big numbers, but maybe doing it by hoarding clients and delivering value individually? How do we reward people and recognize people for selling the breadth of the firm's capabilities? Because that's what activators do. How do we reward and recognize people for creating a business development routine? Because we know that's what great activators do. How do we rethink even not just monetary, but the non-monetary incentives and rewards? How do we hire associates? How do we elect people to partner? Are we looking for those activator characteristics? Or are we just looking at total book of business and how much they bill every year? And so I think a lot of firms, it's interesting when you show them their results and they see that they're weighted in confidants or in experts or debaters. Usually there's this moment where it's like, how did this happen? And then somebody senior on the call says, because we told people through the signals we send that this is the behavior we reward. So we created
Yes.
this, you know?
It's like show me the outcome, and I'll show you the incentive, isn't it? I think is the term. Isn't it?
Exactly.
Like
Yeah, that's right.
you can see what's driving the behaviours. Is there one profile that businesses should avoid at all costs being heavy in? Is there one that kind of obviously if you're high in activators that typically denotes success? Is there one where you'd say if you've got a load of experts or if you've got a load of
Hmm.
confidants, you're in big trouble?
Well, I think there's the reality is, and this is true that there are, and this is true of Challenger as well, maybe with the exception of the lone wolf profile, but every
Yeah,
once in a while we need people to break the mold and innovate and come up with a new way of doing things. But if you look at these five partner types, I always say this when I'm presenting it to at partner retreats or in front of groups of partners at firms. There are really great things about each of those five profiles, and were you to create the kind of uh, unicorn business developer, you would pick and choose the best from across the five. But that's not how real life kind of pans out. Instead, people kind of pick one of those five doors. They don't walk through all five simultaneously.
yeah,
And the reality is that for some of them, there's a soft underbelly to some of these approaches. I think the one that, if you look across professional services, that you find least, well, the one that's least effective. So when we regress all these profiles against performance, if you look at the 50th percentile partner, and then you look at how hard they lean into each of these five profiles and what would happen to their personal revenue generation, four of them that we kind of hinted on this before, but experts, confidants, debaters, and realists, four of those, the more you lean into those approaches, the worse you do.
right,
Only activators had a positive statistical correlation with performance, meaning if you took an average partner and they went from not very good to very good on being an activator, so from weak demonstration of activator skills and behaviors and approaches to strong demonstration, they could lift their personal revenue generation by 30 to up to 32%, which is huge in a
yeah,
firm and for an individual partner. The worst performing one was actually, interestingly, the expert. And I think, and I've lived this before. So I mentioned I've been in management consulting, and I've seen this. And what you find in a lot of firms is that these experts really do struggle with business development. And I think when you talk to them, they really do believe that that is something you're either born with or not. And if you're not, you're best served by just being a really good lawyer or a really good M&A advisor or a really good search consultant. And if you do that, word will get around and people will call you and ask for your help. And I think that is a posture and a profile that firms really, really struggle with. And I think the problem with it is because they develop such specialized expertise. If I think of my own experience in management consulting, we had people who were IO psychologists, experts in employee engagement or selection and assessment, hiring, screening, things like that. Really deep, really specialized, super technical expertise. These folks, most of them did not sell anything. The way they hit their numbers is they got pulled into other people's deals. So I would sell something. I say, Aaron, I need somebody who is an expert in IO psych in this specific field, and I carve out some of the origination credit on my deal, and I'll give it to you. And
yeah,
so you get there because you're part of the support team. And a lot of these firms then look at it and say, well, and they get duped into this view as well that we can't teach these people how to sell, so maybe we'll create two tracks of partners. We've got experts and then we've got sales focused partners. And most of the firms who go down that path will tell you that's a recipe for disaster because you end up, the incentives get all kind of screwy, the comp structures are very different. And so in our experience has been every single, because we didn't study personality, right? That's a hiring and firing decision. We studied things that with the right training, coaching, incentives, rewards, enablement, every partner can get better at the activator thing. And
yeah.
we've seen this, right? And we're not talking about a wholesale switch, but we're talking about, hey, if you are a confidant, if you are an expert, if you are a debater, we're just trying to raise your activator levels a bit. And we see it through really tactical guidance. And these people have success with this and they realize, okay, I'm just adding a new tool to my tool belt. I'm not going to
Yeah.
stop being who I am, but I know I need to evolve my approach because clients are buying very differently today than they once did.
I suppose with professional services being so subject to the Pareto principle as well,
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, you'd imagine that the activator represents the 20% in the Pareto principle. The
Yeah.
need to get middling performers to basically contribute more revenue
Yeah.
it's kind of a non-negotiable if you're expecting a 37% decrease in business over the next 5 years.
Yeah, non-negotiable. And I would say in this market, there is lateral hiring is pervasive. So the way a lot of these firms grow is that they don't try to get their average performers to step it up and deliver more business. They go and hire away top rainmakers from other firms and then
Uh,
pay them a bunch of money. Now, that can be really dangerous because what you might be doing is bringing in somebody who's been really successful because they've been a confidant, right? And they've hoarded
yeah,
relationships, and now you're bringing that kind of approach into your own firm. And what do all the young associates see? Well, they see that the person who just got paid a king's ransom to come and bring their book of business over to our law firm or our accounting firm, well, the way they operate is they hoard relationships, so I guess I should do that too, right? Because clearly
Rewarding,
our firm rewards that, right?
yeah, rewarding the behavior, and then you're creating mini versions of that, right? By
There you go.
by people, and it's always often the case. And it reminds me a lot of the lone wolf
Yeah.
in the selling, where people turn around and say, well, they're not following the processes, they're not doing the training, they're not doing this, not doing that, but they're getting some degree of success. I need to be more like them. You're like, no,
Yeah.
no,
No, no, no. No. Yeah.
no, outlier in the situation is really, really interesting. So, obvious question. You've got all this research that you've now published.
Yep.
What's the plan with this research? Now, I know one of the great things that you did with JOLT Effect is you kind of turned this into a product in itself, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Is that the aspiration with this research as well?
Yeah, it's probably two things. So one is, so we're just, we spent this has been like a 2-year project around Activator, and we spent the research came out we had the data in the spring, early spring of this year. And we started road testing it and working on the names of the profiles and testing different ways of telling the story. And we think we've kind of gotten to a point where we wanted to share it publicly. So we did the HBR article, came out last week. So it's What Today's Rainmakers Do Differently is the article Aaron's referred to before. Next step is to turn that into a book. There is a mountain. We were limited by space with the HBR article, but there is a mountain of research, case studies from firms, case studies from individual partners, really breaking down the skills and the competencies of the activator, the whole playbook in its full glory. That is more of a book length deliverable. So we're shopping that around right now. That's probably a late 2024, early 2025 deliverable. But yeah, we've actually taken these insights and turned it into a development product for associates in professional services, early stage partners, experienced partners, and we're delivering this to some of the biggest professional services firms in the world. So it's been really exciting to see them kind of see this research, and you gotta. I think what's interesting to me is that these partners are deeply skeptical people in general. Like they went to top universities, they spent a long time in school, they're very smart, they're very skeptical, and they're convinced by data when they see it, and they kick the tires, and the data correlates or jives with their reality and what they see across their colleagues and what they see working in the market. And times they've been successful personally, and times they've maybe struggled personally. And that's the moment where the light bulb goes off for them. And so the next question is like, how do I get better at that?
Yeah.
And so that's our whole program. And again, we're pretty excited. That has been a fun business to be a part of. We've got a facilitator bench operating now in different geographic markets and in different specialty areas. So we've got some folks who are more focused on law, some folks who are more focused on investment banking or wealth management or accounting and consulting, et cetera.
Sounds amazing. It seems like an amazing thing to run your business through if you're in this line of work. To get an understanding of this would be super, super valuable. And
Yep.
the point you made before, again, I mean, even if you can get a 15-20% increase on this, it means so much to those
Huge,
organizations.
yeah.
So much
It's
for
huge.
competition as well. So really excited to see how that pans out.
And I won't just maybe one final note here, Aaron, is that it's really rewarding for those individuals too. And I think especially, and many of their firms have done them a disservice by sending the message that either you're born with this or you're not. And it can be very scary for somebody who's been successful their whole life, right? They went to great university, they went to great law school, they went to a great business school. They deliver great work product, and now suddenly they're struggling, and that can be really demotivating. And not to go too dark, but not surprisingly, a lot of these professions have high rates of alcoholism and depression and things like that. So it has real kind of mental health implications for the people doing this stuff. And life is really hard, right? Because there are big expectations, and they've never been taught to be successful. But again, I think that's why it's personally rewarding, because you see these people, like, they get it and they go do it and they say it worked, and I didn't think it would work. I didn't think I could do it, but I could do it. And it's not rocket science. It's just learning how to do the stuff that great business developers have kind of figured out. So that I find personally rewarding as well.
That's very cool indeed. Yeah, and I second that, because I've worked with these people as well, and
Mm-hmm.
it's a tricky industry. And you make
It
the
is.
point that a lot of these businesses hoover up highly successful people who've been really successful throughout their academic career, and then I think it can be a shock to the system when they don't necessarily show the same levels of success in the working world as
That's
well.
right.
So
That's right.
really interesting point. Well, Matt, as always, it's been a real pleasure to chat to you, and I could probably go on for another couple of hours learning more.
We'll do it again soon, I'm sure.
Yeah. Is there any final thoughts you want to leave with the listeners and viewers on the research and where they can get hold of you, or anything in particular?
Yeah, no, I mean, obviously check out the, if you want to connect with me on LinkedIn, I love connecting with people who said they heard me on your show. That's always great, and continue the dialogue after you give the show a listen. Check out the HBR article, of course, what today's rainmakers do differently. And then if you are interested, if you are in professional services and you want to learn more about our programs, it's activatordevelopmentsystem.com is our lengthy but says what it is URL. So Activator Development Systems, where you can learn more about that.
Cool. I'll make sure those links are in the bio. And
Cool.
again, thank you so much, mate. It's been a real pleasure.
Always a pleasure. Thanks for having me here.